Well, I take it for a number of things. I have an ovarian cyst that I've had for about 4 years now, and it gives me a lot of pain and kind of continues to grow. And I also have, use it for reduction of stress and anxiety and that kind of thing. I'm an attorney, so I have a lot of stress in, my daily life and on my professional side, so it helps alleviate that as well. So,
on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the pain?
I would say that it reaches levels to 8 to 9, but on a daily basis it would, be something that would be impairing me from kind of doing physical activity, exercising, and that kind of thing. And then at certain times it gets to the point of being, keeping me in bed and that kind of thing. So. And
what did you use before medical marijuana?
Before I had my cyst, I didn't need to use anything. And then as that progressed, I was using, Tylenol 3, high doses of ibuprofen and other things to help stop the inflammation, because that's another big component of it, is not just the pain, but kind of the inflammation. So I was using things like that would lead me to have kind of an upset stomach or just feel kind of, groggy.
Right.
So.
And how do you take the marijuana?
Well, it depends. It depends on what I'm using it for. Mm-hmm. So if I'm looking for reduction of pain, smoking does work, but I find that using, sublingually is my preference. Mm-hmm. I also do bake and use edibles and that kind of thing from time to time. And if I'm using it for stress reduction, I have a vaporizer as well. Right. So I kind of, it's depending on, the specific symptoms I'm having and how I'm using it. And I also do use it recreationally as well. So I think that, when I'm using it for that purpose versus kind of a medical purpose of alleviating pain, there's a difference there. So.
Mm-hmm. And so do you take the oil then when you say sublingual?
Yeah, I actually have a couple of different ways that I do it. I prepare it in a tincture sometimes, and also, I've been exploring different ways to use it sublingually directly as well. So even though we've had a law on the books, since the end of 2012, we have not, patients here still don't have access. The Department of Public Health is charged with, licensing dispensaries. They've taken quite a bit of time, and they've just now licensed, given the first temporary authorizations, but there's really no dispensary in sight, and you're kind of left either having to grow your own, which is not really feasible for most people, especially people who are, have children, people who are, have other jobs. I mean, growing cannabis and growing medical quality cannabis takes a lot of effort and should be done by professionals and should be done in a setting, where patients can have access. And I am a patient of a caregiver who was serving multiple patients because the Department of Public Health hadn't yet authorized any dispensaries, and we're involved in a civil suit at this point now against the Department of Public Health to somehow at least allow patients access in the interim until they allow these dispensaries, because in the meantime either you're left trying to get it from an illicit source, it hasn't been tested. I mean, the caregiver that I was going to was testing through a laboratory, MCR Labs here, and they were, so I could know how to go on there. That allowed me to go on and accurately dose. And so that's important for patients to have. It's unfortunate and unfair for patients to have a system that allows them the freedom and the ability to use medical marijuana, but then doesn't allow the mechanism for them to use it in a safe way, in a way that can allow them to use it in a medical, to kind of a medical standard. And so I think that the patients in New York are going to face are facing an uphill battle now if you guys are at the point where you are just, still having a lot of barriers in the first instance of just giving the prescription.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So,
Right out of the gate.
yeah, if you guys are at that point now, and then it actually becomes, who's going to be supplying the cannabis, and then also I know New York has a restriction on smoking, which I can understand from a medical perspective. I mean, from a liberties perspective, I think that it's that part's unfortunate. But I think the mindset behind that was probably to make it known that this was for a medical need and a medical purpose. And I think that using cannabis, sublingually and using it, ingesting has a lot of different issues as far as uptake and time that it takes and that kind of thing. But I think that you find, patients that are using sublingually are getting a fast and effective treatment. They're getting the same biomechanism as smoking without having to smoke, and being able to accurately dose. I think that there's really an opportunity there for much more accurate dosing, and I think you see that in the pharmaceuticals that are being developed, and their application. But you also see that in just the traditional medical application of cannabis. I mean, if you go back and look at when medical cannabis was part of, United States pharmacopoeia, it was being used as tinctures and that kind of thing. And so, there are a lot of different ways that patients can go and make their own tinctures and butters. There are about 1,000 recipes online that from anywhere from places like High Times to Medical Jane, other places that give instructions. The problem is that in the home extraction process for patients, it does become difficult to quantify the dose. Right. There's a kind of rough and tumble way that people can extract in butters, and that's something I have a lot of experience with doing. And while you can dose, it becomes difficult. It's the importance of testing laboratories, like the ones we have here, like MCR Labs, is the ability for patients to start with a product that they know the accurate, they know the percentage of THC, and so they have a better chance of knowing the dose. If you got very precise processes in place for patients at home, they certainly could get to a very accurate dose, one that would rival something like GW. If you take a look at some studies that have been done, including one that GW has done in regard for potential for abuse, and those studies are done in order to show the FDA or any governing authority when a patient might start to abuse a medicine or when a person would be considered high off a medicine. You can look at their studies and show that and see that the potential for abuse only begins after about 10 or 25 milligrams of THC. For GW, I believe that it was after the entire 16 sprays of their product, which I believe is 2.5 milligrams for each spray. So it was only at the point that that patients began to get high. So I guess you could say there's kind of a sweet spot where patients are receiving the therapy needed to alleviate symptoms for things like MS or whatever they're treating for, but they are not what one would consider high. And I think that's very important for people to understand, because I think there is some consideration or some backlash against medical marijuana patients. There's a thought or that maybe people are only trying to get high and really not trying to medicate. And that goes back to the importance of being able to have tested product and safe access to medical cannabis, because when patients have the information and the data, then they can start to treat their own symptoms based on research data. But obviously we know that there are kind of impediments to getting research studies done. But there are some out there, notably GW, that has tested and has had protocols for a variety of different conditions and shown that small amounts of THC are very effective at alleviating those amounts that fall within that kind of sweet spot where a patient is not actually high. So for me, vaporizing and smoking are really kind of recreational ways of administering cannabis. I think that, not to delve too deeply into the science about it, when you're raising the temperature of the cannabis that high, especially in combustion, you're decarboxylating some of the cannabinoids, but not all of them, so it's inefficient, number one. But number two, what's happening is you're also creating CBN. Out of the THC. So you're degrading a lot of the THC, and that degradation leads to a lot of the grogginess that happens, that comes along with smoking. And I think that anybody who's kind of smoke can attest to the fact that there is kind of a grogginess and a sedation that comes along with that, and some will say that that's attributable to the CBN, and that's been my experience as well. And so eating, ingesting, and using sublingually, in my opinion, gives more of a clean therapy, because what you're doing is you're actually only allowing the THC to breach the membrane. You're not actually doing any other degradation during your administration method. So I think that's, so to answer your question, if I'm using for alleviation of symptoms of my cyst, or just kind of general anxiety or stress and nervousness, then that would be using it sublingually, or ingesting, if that was something. There's something that patients can do, which is actually use sublingually and then also ingest, which kind of gives a more of a longer therapy as well. Yeah. So I think that once patients have access to information, once they have access to data, and the unfortunate thing is that it really is the science behind cannabis and medical cannabis really is shrouded in a lot of misinformation and a lot of mystery, and that's because marijuana has been treated only as an illicit substance for so long. And so I think it's going to take a while, not only for reputable people to come forward with the data, which is something again that makes the laboratories, MCR labs in particular, just did a vaporization experiment that showed patients how that it was a guide for patients to begin accurately dosing off vaporizers. And so once patients have access to information, and the internet is not a great source of information, because what has happened over, and again, that comes from somebody who began just trying to make accurate tinctures myself. There's a lot of different misinformation, and the little bit of actual data that has been out there has been taken and spun in so many illogical directions that it's hard for a patient to know what's out there and what's real and what they can rely on. But I think that that's beginning to change. And I think that patients, the benefit I think to patients, even in states that have restrictive medical marijuana laws, is that I think when more data begins to come out showing not only the efficacy but also different alternative, more safe ways that people begin to become comfortable, not just people that use cannabis as a medicine, but people that are interested in using it but are, kind of hesitant to use it. Because I think that there is a whole group of people out there who would never consider using cannabis right now. In some way, I don't blame them, because if you've never had any experience with cannabis and all you've heard is everything negative about it, and now it's available as a medicine, but the only ways that you see to use it are ways that you can't quantify, and you don't really know what dose you're getting. And I think that's a big issue for doctors too. I think a lot of doctors are very interested in this, but from a medical perspective, if you're not meeting certain criteria about safety and the ability to dose, then it's really kind of off the table and put into kind of the alternative therapy, and that's unfortunate, because if you look at even all the other prescribed medications, they are derivatives of or synthetics of natural sources. So it's not, there's precedent for using natural things for in established medicine, and I think that hopefully cannabis will get there.